Okay, so the past two videos we've been talking about what happens with glycolysis and then into the glucose being turned into pyruvate, which then gets converted into acetyl-CoA, and if oxygen is present, can go into the citric acid cycle, and then through oxidative phosphorylation and chemiosmosis to make a significant number of ATP. So what we're going to talk about today then is what if there is no oxygen available? Okay? And so if there's no oxygen available, these things here are not going to occur. You're just going to have glycolysis happening. So we're going to be talking about anaerobic respiration and fermentation, which are not exactly the same thing. So we're talking about those two things. This should be a relatively short video, and we will wrap and tie all this stuff together in class. Okay, so first let's look at the difference between the two of these. So the first one, let's look at anaerobic respiration here. Okay, so anaerobic respiration is when there is still an electron transport chain. So there's still an electron transport chain here. The difference is the final electron acceptor is not oxygen. It's something other than oxygen. It may be sulfate, it may be nitrate. Okay, so it may be sulfate, it may be nitrate, it may be sulfur, fumarate, but it is not oxygen. So I still have an electron transport chain. I just have something other than oxygen acting as the final electron acceptor. Fermentation is going to use substrate level phosphorylation. Oh, I don't know what that is. Okay, so I'm using substrate level phosphorylation here. Okay, instead of an electron transport chain to make the ATP. Wow. Okay, so I've got substrate level phosphorylation, still generating some ATP, okay, but not using an electron transport chain to do it here. Okay. So let's focus first on fermentation. Okay, so fermentation is going to occur after glycolysis. So remember, glycolysis always happens. That starts everything. And pyruvate is kind of the choice. Okay? That's where it's going to either go towards aerobic cellular respiration or fermentation. And so in fermentation, it includes glycolysis. So you've made 2 ATP that were released there in glycolysis. And then it consists of a series of reactions that, depending upon the type of fermentation, the end product will vary, and some of the other byproducts will vary, but you're going to regenerate that NAD+. Okay, so you're going to regenerate NAD+, that can go back in glycolysis and be used again during glycolysis. So we're going to look at alcohol fermentation and lactic acid fermentation. Okay, so the first kind of fermentation is alcohol fermentation. Okay, alcohol fermentation is the conversion of the pyruvate. Okay, it's a 2-step process. So I've got step 1, step 2. Okay, so this is a 2-step process. Remember, same as always, you don't have to memorize all these little details. Okay, so it's a 2-step process here where I release CO2 in the first step. If y'all remember from freshman year, we put those grapes in a bag with the active yeast cells and we let them sit all class period, and at the end of the class period the plastic bag was puffed up with air. Okay? That's because the yeast was doing alcohol fermentation, and during alcohol fermentation CO2, which is a gas, is released. Okay, so alcohol fermentation, again, is a 2-step process converting that pyruvate into ethanol, which is ethyl alcohol, and it is releases CO2. So this is done by yeast. We'll do this. Okay, that's how they make beer. It's how they make wine. It's how bread rises. You add yeast to bread and dough because as the yeast does its fermentation, it will create air pockets because of the CO2 that it's releasing. In addition to the ethanol, you're also, again, regenerating that NAD+. That can then be reused during glycolysis. so the other kind of fermentation is lactic acid fermentation. Lactic acid fermentation is just a one-step process here. Okay, so this pyruvate here is reduced to NADH, okay, and lactate is my end product. There's no release of CO2 here. This is done by some fungi and bacteria, in particular bacteria that would help make cheese and yogurt, dairy products. And, human muscle cells also do this. When there's not enough oxygen present, that's what our muscle cells flip over and will start doing, is they'll do lactic acid fermentation, which you notice has a significant decrease in the amount of ATP available. Right, you got the 2 ATP there from glycolysis. The fermentation part down here doesn't actually produce any more ATP, so you go from your 30 to 32 option based on oxidative phosphorylation and chemiosmosis down to just the 2 ATP you got from glycolysis. This is what happens when you exercise a lot and you feel your muscles burn. Okay, so think about when you're exercising a lot and what happens to your breathing. Well, you start to breathe heavier, and you're trying to take in more oxygen because you're depleting your body's oxygen supply for cellular respiration. This is why we breathe. We breathe oxygen in to be able to make ATP, to be able to do cellular respiration. It's why we breathe carbon dioxide out, okay? Because our cells make carbon dioxide as a waste product of making ATP. And so when your cells are not getting enough oxygen and they're unable to do oxidative phosphorylation and chemiosmosis, they do this lactic acid fermentation, and they're producing this lactic acid. Well, the buildup of lactic acid lowers the pH in your cell. So inside of your muscle cells become more acidic. And so that burning sensation is actually a warning that the inside of your muscle cells are becoming a little too acidic. Okay, so let's talk about the 2 kinds of anaerobes. Okay, you have what's called an obligate anaerobe. Okay, obligate anaerobes are, I can't spell, like always. Okay, obligate anaerobes do fermentation or anaerobic respiration, So they do fermentation or anaerobic respiration, and they cannot survive with O2, in the presence of O2. If there is oxygen around, the oxygen will actually kill them. So these are your obligate anaerobes. They have to do fermentation and anaerobic respiration. They do not do oxidative phosphorylation. The presence of the oxygen, will actually kill them. Your other kind is facultative anaerobes. Facultative anaerobes can do fermentation or cellular respiration, oxidative phosphorylation, really depending upon what's available. And again, that's where we're talking about with that pyruvate is the fork in the road, right? You have your glycolysis happen, and that makes the pyruvate, and then the pyruvate has either an oxygen available choice or no oxygen available choice, and those would be your facultative anaerobes. Yeast, a lot of your bacteria, they will do this. So we've talked about all these different ways that we can produce ATP by eating glucose, by eating sugar, okay? But most of you know, and hopefully are well aware, that 1, you don't eat only sugar, and 2, you should not eat only sugar. We eat a wide variety of foods. So if you look here, you can see that your glycolysis is willing to accept a wide variety of carbohydrates and sugars. It does not only accept glucose. Okay? It has a wide variety of carbohydrates. Remember, our pattern for carbohydrates it's just carbon-water chains, right? H2O, that 1-to-1 ratio. So they can accept a wide variety of carbohydrates there. And you can see that proteins, once they're broken down into amino acid, okay, they can either feed into glycolysis, they can feed straight into the citric acid cycle, so they can also be used to produce ATP. Okay, same with some fats. Your fats can get broken down and they can enter into glycolysis as well as be converted into acetyl-CoA, which means then they'd be able to go into the citric acid cycle and oxidative phosphorylation. So sugars are not the only things that can be used to produce ATP for us. Okay, so regulation for respiration is usually done on a feedback loop system. Okay, it's a form of feedback inhibition. Okay, so a form of feedback inhibition where basically if my ATP levels drop, then my respiration rate will increase. Okay, and so if my ATP levels are increasing, doing a significant amount of respiration here, and they reach a certain point in their increase, okay, then that will actually slow respiration rate down. So it's a feedback inhibition system where they will regulate the enzymes. Okay, every conversion in all these chemical reactions, every process is going to be regulated by enzymes. And so the concentration of ATP levels are monitored, and then the rate of respiration is actually changed by regulating these particular enzymes. Okay, so we'll be kind of putting all this together, making sure we're not missing the big picture, doing a few lab experiments with this, and wrapping up our respiration class.